The Bowser administration was unhappy with the way two major construction contracts were awarded. Can we back up for a moment and tell us a little bit about the projects and the contracts?
Sure. So the contracts were for Buzzard Point and St. Elizabeth's East Campus. Now, these are two, big, high-profile projects for the city. And in both cases for these contracts, Fort Myer Construction lost out. Now, Fort Myer is a well-known local firm. They do a lot of street paving and other work in DC, and they're also a big-time campaign contributor. They've donated a lot of money to Muriel Bowser, but also other city officials.
Also donated to the now defunct Fresh Pack.
Right, also to Fresh Pack. And so, speaking to sources within DGS, there was a lot of concern about how much attention the city was paying to these two contracts. And so ultimately, in the end, Fort Myer did not win the St. Elizabeth's contract. It went to Gilbane, which is another company.
Based in Rhode Island.
Right, based in Rhode Island. And there was a huge price difference between the two bids. One was $16 million, one was $10 million. So it was a huge difference in price. And DGS ultimately picked Gilbane over Fort Myer.
They picked the $6 million over the $16 million, presumably because it saves the taxpayers a great deal of money, but go ahead.
Right. But according to the city, there were a lot of concerns about how DGS was basically picking the winners, scoring companies' bids. And it'll get into the weeds here about preference points for local companies known as CBEs or certified business entities. But the city says they basically did not like or did not know about how DGS was performing or was using this new system that basically diluted the preference points for local CBEs.
We're already in the weeds.
I know.
So
Now,
let's mention the numbers. They were giving 12 points per 100 of preference, and it changed to 12 points per 200.
Right. I think it's 112, but I think the city administrator can clarify. But yeah, so basically when you got 12 points in 100 or 112 ranking system and you get 12 for 200, there's a difference. It basically, you don't get as many points for being a local CBE. And so it was concern over that ranking system. But when I talked to the sources about, why these two employees were let go, and I think that's the key question here. Why were these employees fired? What was it about these two contracts in particular? I mean, I have a note, an affidavit from the former Admiral Weaver saying significant interest was being paid by the city administrator, the mayor's office, about these two contracts. So what was it about these two contracts that led to these employees being forced out? And more broadly, I mean, what message does that say to the rest of the folks working at DGS or other employees?
Well, you mentioned the city administrator twice, and he is in the studio with us. Rashad Young is the city administrator for the District of Columbia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kojo.
In case you have questions or comments, you can call us at 800-433-8850 or send email to kojo@wamu.org. You can send us a tweet at Kojo Show or go to our website, kojoshow.org. Join the conversation there. Rashad Young, you have publicly said that there was indeed concern about how contracts are being awarded, but it's not really about companies with ties to Mayor Bowser. If not, what are the issues?
Yes. So thank you, Kojo, for the opportunity, and thank you, Patrick. Let's talk about what this really is about, and I'm going to start with what it isn't about. It is not about who got what award. I don't care who got what award in these instances. It's not relevant to me. In fact, I didn't know who the bidders were until the issues around the procurement processes and the problems there arose. I won't be talking about the two individuals in question because we don't talk about personnel matters, and so I need to say that up front. What this is about three things. One, it's about changes to a long-standing practice, nearly 30-year policy that favored CBEs in getting preference points.
CBEs are certified business enterprises, meaning local companies that have 50% of their employees here, 50% of their management here, and the like.
That's right. And so this long-standing policy, which is a value of this administration and the council and the district to support local businesses, was changed. And as Patrick indicated, it was changed such that the preference points that CBEs normally enjoy was diluted. And that is tremendously problematic. We know at least 2 instances where contracts were awarded, but for this change, in all likelihood would have went to CBEs. And so it had a real consequence for changing.
So presumably in your conversation with the DGS director and the employees, you asked the question, why were these points diluted? Why was the influence of local companies being able to get contracts diluted? What answer were you given?
So I don't really want to talk about what specific employees did or didn't do.
Okay.
What I know is that the agency wanted to change the scoring methodology and the weighting methodology, and so they changed it. The problem with that is a significant policy shift like that requires approval and discussion and vetting. And it doesn't even stand to reason that one agency administers procurement on a different point system than the rest of the agencies, or the central agency, which is the procurement's office in DC, on a different system. So that's the first problem. The second issue really is that there were specific instances where procurement processes ran afoul of our procedures, they ran afoul of policy, of best practices, and they were indefensible. Those procurement practices were indefensible. The third issue is that there was great risk to the District of Columbia in a couple of instances of these procurements, risk that would have exposed us to millions of dollars of financial loss and in a project stall that we could not predict. So there were 3 really issues here that drove to this conversation in my office's intervention, not who got the award. Could care less who got the award.
Patrick?
I mean, I guess, and again, this is contracting and it gets hard to follow, but you know, if you look at this St. Elizabeth's campus bid, you have on one hand a $16 million bid and you have the $6 million bid. There's a huge difference between those 2 things. I mean, didn't they make the right decision there?
Let's be clear. We have 3 issues. One is a broad issue of the points. The other issues are the procurement practices and 2 solicitations. You're talking about St. Elizabeth's. I wholeheartedly supported, endorsed, and directed the award to go to the lowest bidder. That is not what is at question. What's at question, and in fact, that award is currently under protest by the very bidder you suggest has some interest, or that we had some interest in providing the contract to. They didn't get the award. I supported them not getting the award. We're actively dealing with that issue in the protest process. So there are other issues in the procurement practices around St. Elizabeth's that I can't discuss because we're in litigation over that issue, right? So that is not the issue of price. I agree we shouldn't pay $10 million more for something that we can get for less. I agree with that. I supported that. There has never been any question about that.
Except that there was a report indicating, it might have been Patrick's report, that there was a conversation between you and DSG in which it was suggested that Fort Myer could be brought in as a local contractor working with Gildan, and that as a result of that, the $6 million price that Gilbane had offered could somehow change so that...
No. The issue was this project was protested. There is a standard, a very high standard that you have to meet with the Contract Appeals Board in order to move past that protest and work on the project while it's being protested, right? So the best avenue for us was to get the protest withdrawn so that we could go ahead and prepare the site at St. Elizabeth so that this
How do you get the protest withdrawn?
Wizards practice facility could move forward. We have 2 choices. We could try to proceed under protest, where you have to make the case and get the Contractors Appeals Board to agree that you're allowed to do that with a very high standard, or the protest can be withdrawn. We tried to get the protest withdrawn
by trying to bring Fort Myer in?
No, by saying we are going to, for a number of the subcontracts, make it only available to CBEs. We even went a step further. We didn't say a CBE. We said it has to be 3 or more CBEs that are qualified to do this work for us to restrict the procurement to only CBEs. That's what we were trying to do in the event to get the protest withdrawn. It wasn't withdrawn, so we continue now to fight that fight.
It's my understanding that the contracts, as you pointed out, will go forward with the national firm Gilbane, not Fort Myer, the local firm. That's correct, right?
We are trying to go forward, but a decision has to be rendered by the Contract Appeals Board to see if we are allowed to go forward.
But given that the shakeup did not change the outcome here, what is the concern? Is it about the future of an independent Department of General Services, or
it is about making sure that we are accountable, that we fairly and appropriate within guidelines, policy, and practice administered procurement solicitations in the District of Columbia. Don't forget, this mayor created and is the co-chair, and I'm the other co-chair of the Procurement Accountability Review Board. We look, as a matter of course, on our procurement decisions to make sure that they are above board, that they are ethical, that they comply with our rules and procedures.
Everything that you have said here seems to be logical and makes sense, but there's one issue we have not discussed, and that's the optics. It's about the optics about companies that make significant contributions to mayoral campaign, even as they are bidding on contracts. There would be no controversy here at all. Were Fort Myer Construction not a major contributor to Mayor Bowser's campaigns and to the now defunct Fresh Pack?
I can't prevent the fact that Fort Myers bids on every infrastructure project in the District of Columbia. They've been here a very long time. And the optics that you talk about have to be grounded in facts. So you look at the facts, you look at the reason that we make decisions, you look at what the facts are in this instance, then the optics should become a non-issue. We didn't care about who got the involvement here. My involvement in these solicitations did not occur until the very end of the process. If I cared who won the procurement, why wouldn't we have been involved on the front end of the process? They became an issue when the city was at nearly $100 million at risk in the soccer stadium deal, because if that had been protested and we didn't deliver that project on time, the team could walk away. Right. And in this procurement, this wasn't my just evaluation of how this procurement process worked. We had the Office of Contracts and Procurement look at it. We had the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel look at it. The Attorney General's office had issues with the procurement in the way in which it was handled. This isn't Rashad, the city administrator, making a fly independent judgment. It is a judgment that's rooted in fact where a number of agencies raised the exact same concerns that I have about this process.
Patrick
and Rashad, you mentioned that you raised concerns about this process, but there were 16 other DGS contracts that were using this system, but you and the Mayor's Legal Counsel only got involved into these two involving St. E's and Buzzard Point. Both are the Fort Myer company contracts, which is why I think the optics here look like your office was intervening here.
So I think, no, that isn't accurate. There are 16 projects. There were a number of solicitations that were on the street already under this 200-point system after I made the commitment, one, directed the agency to change the procurement system back to the 100-point scale, and two, made my commitment to the city council, who was about to legislate the requirement of a 100-point system because of the problems that this represented.
But I need to point to this, and this is, again, Weaver's statement, where he says, St. Elizabeth's East Campus Buzzard Point project generated significant interest from the city administrator's office and the mayor's office of legal counsel. I mean, when you see this, this points to your office getting involved in these two specific contracts.
And you have to ask, why did I get involved in the contracts?
And how often in the past have you gotten directly involved?
So I get involved in procurements in one way or the other, probably weekly. The day I talked to Patrick Madden, I had 3 procurement issues that week. These two projects of significant import to the District of Columbia. And let me just keep reiterating, the DC United contract, $100 million was at risk. It is my duty to manage the day-to-day activities of the city. It is my responsibility to make sure that we operate with fidelity within the rules and guidelines that we are supposed to be followed, and that our decisions are defensible.
Is it your position, though, that you didn't know that DGS had started this new scoring system, or that the mayor's office didn't know?
We did not know that the change had occurred. We started to hear from the CBE community. We started to hear from other agencies. The CBE community raised the flag and said, what's this 200 point system about? And why are we only getting 12 points out of 200 when we used to get 12 points out of 100? The director of small business sent emails to the DGS agency to say, you shouldn't do this. This is going to cause an issue and dilute the importance of
What is the
CBEs.
proper procedure for changing the point distribution?
With a policy issue of this magnitude, that issue should have been raised to my office, raised with me in writing. We would have reviewed it, and we would have reviewed it with either I would have made a decision or recommendation, or I would have discussed it with the mayor before it had been implemented.
Well,
that's what you would do.
The reason I keep raising that
change.
question is that it doesn't make sense when a city says that we would like to give preference to our local contractors. We want to make sure of that. To have this office change the point system arbitrarily, which is why I asked earlier, and I'll ask again, what was the rationale given for changing the point system to dilute the influence of local certified business enterprises?
So I can't defend.
Was there some way to some offer to make up for that in some other way?
I can't defend the rationale of the 200 point system because I fundamentally didn't agree with it, which is why we directed it to go back.
On to the phones then. Here is Bill in Arlington, Virginia. Bill, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. I had a question about the procurement where the cost difference or the bid difference was $10 million between the two bidders. But I'll just make a suggestion about what you were just discussing regarding changing the preference rules for local businesses. One reason might be a cheaper price to the local government. You enhance competition when you do that by expanding the bidding pool, having more people come in when they know that the local businesses aren't going to get as much preference. So I could see that, frankly, on that basis.
Can you see that, Rashad? Yeah.
I think people have a misnomer that CBEs or local business preference automatically raise costs, and I don't know that I subscribe to that. What I think is that if you want to change a significant policy, for whatever you think the merits of that policy are, there is a process of review, vetting, discussion, and analysis that looks at trade-offs, that looks at what you get and what you lose. And in this instance, this was not done by the city administrator or by the mayor, and you cannot operate in that instance, especially when we have laws and a law that talks about CBE preferences, that spells out the fact that CBEs and local businesses will have preference. It isn't within my purview or my agency's purview to change that without a lot of discussion.
Patrick Madden.
I guess I know you can't get into personnel reasons, but you can understand. I mean, I guess the question still goes back to why force these employees out and the message that sends.
So I really can't talk about employee status or the reason for their status or the circumstances of their status.
Did you ask Weaver to remove these employees?
I won't talk about, I mean, we've talked about this last week, and certainly at the outset, I cannot, as much as I would like to, talk about the personnel aspects here.
But you're certainly suggesting that a fundamental change in rules without consultation with the city administrator and the mayor is considered a major offense.
A fundamental change in rules without discussion with the mayor or with me is not something that we take lightly.
On to Kazan in Washington, D.C. Or is it Calzin? Oh, it's not anything at all because your phone's not working very well and I can't hear you at all. Calzin, can you hear me? No, Calvin got cut off. But here is Mary in Washington, D.C. Hi, Mary.
Hi, happy Monday. I was very disturbed by the administrator's point that he didn't know who the contractors were. We got the same completely lame thing on the homeless shelter and the huge contract problems there, that the mayor didn't even, no one knew who the contractors were when they assigned them. I think when someone isn't doing their job, if they didn't know what was going on with the contracting, or they're trying to pretend who the contractors were, wasn't relevant by denying something that they obviously would have known. And it's disingenuous. I mean, you had to know. And I, as a citizen of the district, it makes the appearance of impropriety look a lot larger when you deny knowledge of something that you would have to have knowledge.
If I can respond to that, we do hundreds of solicitations every year. We are not supposed to be, nor should we be, nor is there a reason for me to be involved in who is bidding on what contract, how they are scored while that process is underway. And so the point that I'm trying to make is I did not inject myself into the process to say, who were the bidders? What did they bid? How did they score while the process is moving forward? Because we want it to be objective. We want it to be fair. We want it to be appropriate. We have a panel of people who score solicitations.
But did you ever instruct DGS officials to while the bidding process is going to counsel them on the questions that needed to be answered in the Q&A part of this?
Absolutely. In what Q&A part?
For the St. E's with Fort Myer, did you counsel DGS officials?
No, what I said is this, to your point, there is a huge disparity in cost. Let's make sure that both bidders, that everyone understands what the cost factors are. Let's make sure we get this right. Right. And so there's a procedure for doing that. I said we should make sure we get it correct. The agency also was concerned to say, wow, this is a significant difference. And so when you have a significant difference like that, you want to ensure that everybody is bidding on the same thing, that they understand the dynamics of the contract.
But how many other companies got the same sort of treatment where DGS is counseling them on this part of it?
I think the DGS is required by our rules to go and investigate and evaluate, just like OCP is required by their rules, the Office of Contracting and Procurement, to investigate and evaluate to make sure that the bid is defensible, that it is done properly and according. And the term you're referring to is the BAFO process, and we use BAFOs all the time.
So you've stepped in other DGS cases with other
What's
companies?
the BAFO process?
It's the best and final offer. So whenever you are at a point in the procurement where you're evaluating whomever the bids are, and you seek clarification of that, or you want to make sure that all of the elements are contained therein are correct, then you go to what is called BAFO.
I'm going to Calvin again to see if Calvin is really on the line this time. Calvin, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. My issue was I wanted to find out why there are no preference points, or never have been any preference points, 100 or 200. It doesn't matter to the CBE community for subcontractors. We get hired by these developers and general contractors, and they work us and we're required to be CBE certified, required to be comply with the first source agreement, have an apprenticeship program. We get hired on these contracts by developers or general contractors. They work us and don't pay us. And nobody ever talks about that. And then they mentioned that.
What do you mean they work you and they don't pay you?
Well,
you file suit if you don't get paid.
Well, it's difficult to file suit when you have already taken your earnings from doing the base work and they owe you more with your change order work. It's easier said than done. It's a vicious cycle that the subcontractor has been caught in for decades, and it will not stop.
Do you know anything about this, Rashad?
So a couple things here. One, we have a 35% subcontracting requirement. And so when we bid or solicit for contracts, the general contractors are required to subcontract 35% of that work with CBEs. With respect to the payment issues, our relationship is with the general contractor. And I know that this is a frustrating part for many subs, because if the general doesn't pay the subcontracting on time, or there's a dispute, that is an issue between the general and the subcontractor. Our relationship, our contract is with that general contractor. We know that issue exists, and we're trying to intervene where we hear of it to help address those issues.
Would you support banning contractors from making campaign contributions? Because you can see why the optics here can look the way they look.
So Patrick, you're asking me a political question. I'm the city administrator. I run the government.
Right.
The politics, the campaigning, the contribution, it's not my wheelhouse. I'm a city administrator.
But if you could answer it.
As a city administrator or as a city manager
Right.
of now 4 other cities,
You were last city manager in Alexandria.
I
right?
was.
Right.
We don't do politics, and so that's up for the Council of the
But
District of
would you
Columbia to
support that?
decide.
I mean, the
That's
mayor,
up for the
the
voters
mayor's
to
office
decide.
has routinely opposed any efforts to ban government contractor contributions. I mean, in this case, don't you think it would help your cause here?
So my
It
job
will help this cause probably professionally, but it probably won't help this cause with the mayor. But answer it yourself.
my job is to run the day-to-day activities of the city. I don't get involved in the politics. I don't get involved in campaigning. That's not what I do.
I disagree with my boss, is what he was saying. If we got a tweet from Reginald who says, if your CBE program allows a single bidder to gain a stranglehold on the market, it's time to modify your CBE program. Is, in fact, the company from Rhode Island having a stranglehold on this market?
I don't see that as the case. I'm not sure what that question means exactly, but no, I don't think that's that issue here.
How do you balance I mean, I know you're separate from politics, but it's really hard to completely inoculate yourself from everything that's going on in the city. It's a very political town. It's a contact sport here.
It is.
How do you try to separate yourself from this?
In 1 minute or less.
In 1 minute or less. So, I exercise the judgment that I exercise based upon what's right for the taxpayers, what's right for the stakeholders that we serve. That's where I operate from, and I always try to find the balance between the competing interests that exist in decisions that we make. But I know that I operate and work in a political environment, but I'm about good government. I'm about transparency, accountability, good government practices, and that's what I've been doing for a long time, and that's where I focus.
Quick question. Do you know why the 911 service went down on Saturday night? We're still looking for answers.
We are investigating that issue. The power source within the Office of Unified Communications went down. We're looking at the root causes there, and we're looking at why it didn't automatically go over to our backup generator, but we've got all of our resources focused on that.
Rashad Young, he is the city administrator for the District of Columbia. Patrick Madden is a reporter for WAMU 88.5 News. He's the recipient of last year's Edward R. Murrow Award for Investigative Reporting. Thank you both for joining us. That's it for today's show. But remember, we've always got more for you online and in person. Today, Neely Tucker's latest novel is reviewed in the Washington Post. Tomorrow, he'll be appearing on this show and talking with producer Taylor Burney at Politics and Prose later in the day. Plan to join them starting at 7 p.m. in the Connecticut Avenue store. Until then, spend some time exploring our archives at kojoshow.org and never miss a show when you're on the go by subscribing to the podcast via your favorite podcasting service. Whatever you're up to, be sure to meet us back here tomorrow. We'll speak with DC-based author, the aforementioned Neely Tucker. He's a real reporter who's created a fictional journalist in his latest novel, Plus, Falling Through the Cracks, what happens when the mental health care system fails the most vulnerable among us. That's all coming up tomorrow. Until then, thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo Nandi.